The Smart Buildings Academy podcast with Phil Zito, episode 457. Hey folks, Phil Zito here, and welcome to episode 457 of the Smart Buildings Academy podcast. In this episode, we're going to be talking about mentoring BAS employees. This is going to be continuing our series on BAS management related topics. So, like I mentioned, we're going to be bringing in experts around soft skills, around finance, around sales, and, I've done a lot of mentoring and I've built a training business. So I'll be talking about the mentoring, training, and all of those aspects of things. As always, everything will be available at podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/457. Once again, that is podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/457. Can you do me a favor, though, before we get started? If you are finding these podcast episodes valuable, please go and share this on LinkedIn or Facebook. If you're watching it there, just hit share, add your comments, tag at Smart Buildings Academy. Really appreciate that. If you're on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell and click all so you get notified on these in the future. And if you're on Spotify or iTunes, well, for one, go to the podcast at smartbuildingsacademy.com/457 because you'll be listening to a recording. And I want you to see the visual things we're going to use in these episodes and consider leaving us a 5-star review. I'd really appreciate that. Okay, so let's get started. What we're going to go through is we're going to talk about the current landscape of just talent in the industry right now. We're going to talk about traditional models. We're going to talk about what a quantitative approach would look like. We're going to talk a little bit about Bloom's taxonomy. If you haven't heard of that before, you'll understand it at a good level by the time we finish this. Talk about implementing a quantitative mentoring model. I believe that things should be measured. I've seen great success running an organization where we measure the actions and activities we take. And I believe you'll see that as well. Then we'll answer questions. We'll also talk about challenges and things you should consider as you try to deploy this throughout your organization. So it should be no mystery that we are in a talent crisis in building automation, as is all trades. Uh, According to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, there is going to be a need for 1.2 million new workers in constructors and manufacturing by 2029. If you look at the date, it's 2024, so that's 5 years. How do we create 1.2 million new workers in 5 years? How do we create the tens of thousands of building automation workers that are needed just right now? Traditionally, we've used a lot of onboarding and mentoring programs to go and deliver talent to the industry. I remember when I started in the early 2000s, there was a 4-week training program that was utilized. You'd actually get flown out. I got flown out to Phoenix in the middle of August. That was horrible. But went out there, went for 4 weeks, preloaded dampers, got to physically work on chillers, actuators, air handlers, got to do a lot of controls theory, HVAC theory. And then right about 2008 with the financial crisis, you saw a lot of the mid-level folks gutted out of the industry. That's why we're stratified right now with senior folks and kind of low-level folks and no real mid-talent. You also saw a lot of these kind of training programs just done away with at the OEM level. It used to be you work for a large OEM. They had really robust training programs for technical talent. I'm not saying that those no longer exist, but we're starting to see a resurgence, but there was some dark ages there where those weren't really there anymore. And it was unfortunate. And it's kind of put us in the situation we're in. I mean, there's been, depending on what you look at in the Department of Labor from 2019 to 2020, there's 20% decrease in apprenticeship registrations. We're seeing it's extremely difficult to get electricians, to get mechanics, to get pipe fitters, and we're seeing that also trickle down into controls. Now, what can we do about this? How can we address it? Well, I think in order to address it, we have to first understand traditionally how building automation technicians, salespeople, project managers are developed. And then from there, we need to look at how can we speed that up, because we've got to speed it up. Anyone who tells you that they're okay with 3 years to develop a tech, or 2 years, or 5 years, or whatever. Um, I don't know how they're going to run a business. So, but I will say that those of you that choose to do things faster, whether that's internally or using an external training provider like our own organization, you will have a decided competitive advantage. But how do you do that? How do you approach this model? So, traditionally, if we think about it, a new technician would come on board. They would be given tools. A new salesperson would come on board. They would be put in some kind of sales boot camp. And then you would work that person. Sales is more churn, a lot faster. But technicians, you could see where you could be working person just as a helper for the good part of a year, just having them do basic installation, basic wiring, basic checkout, and that person is not relieving the top level pressure. Which, when you think about this mentoring model, you think about the training and developing model. I'm going to make a premise here. Please correct me in the chat if you disagree. If you think I'm all wet on this premise, please disagree with me. But based on 2,000 plus companies that we're working with from a training perspective, what I'm seeing in the market right now is that a lot of lower level skill tasks are falling on the higher skilled people. So, due to a shortage of installers, due to a shortage of startup technicians, we're seeing programmers and designers, folks of that nature, who are having to take on install work, who are having to take on startup work. And this is creating a perceived, and in some cases, actual lack of designer talent, lack of programming talent. What I tend to see when I talk with organizations and they say we're short programmers, there are legitimately organizations that are short programmers or short designers. But if you're an organization that tracks your job tasks, which you should, from an operational perspective, if you're above 10 million in revenue, you should have some form of ERP, some form of time card management software that enables you to log what tasks your people are doing. Because essentially you should run your business like a conveyor belt. You have someone who does install, then someone who does design, then someone who does, and boom, boom, boom. Um, it's not impossible, but it's difficult to grow a controls business if you don't follow that model, at least on the installation side. But what I would challenge you to look at, and I've seen in organizations we've looked at, when they perceive a shortage of programming talent or designer talent, we dig into it, we find that they have these programmers or designers actually doing tech work. And I equate this to a story. I was working with a hospital at one time, and they wanted to buy a new chiller, and they thought that they needed to buy a new chiller because they didn't have enough tonnage capacity. It was largely a DDC system in the central utility plant, but it was a pneumatic system in the air side. As we dug into the pneumatic system, we found the compressor didn't work. There was water in the lines, all sorts of accumulators and solenoids were failing or not acting properly, and thus you had dampers open, valves running full bore open, and this created an artificial load on the system, which created a perception of lack of tonnage capacity and the need for a chiller. By going and addressing the pneumatic controls and basically enhancing those, they were able to relieve that tonnage that they thought they were going to have to get through a new chiller. We see this very often in organizations. We see that they have technicians. We see that their technicians are doing install. Maybe they're carrying around tools. Maybe they're doing wiring, but they're not uploading, downloading controllers. They're not doing backnet trunks. They're not doing integrations. They're not doing graphics. They're not setting up trends. They're not doing functional tests. And this tends to be due to a lack of skill in a couple areas that I'll talk about. But this then falls on the senior technicians, the senior programmers and designers. So therein lies the rub. In a ideal world, the traditional model would be fine because you would have properly staffed up enough installers. You would have that middle tier of kind of senior technician, and then you'd have designer. What we see in organizations is they're heavily stratified. They have technicians and they have designers and programmers. And the reason why is that senior tech role seems to jump ship. When I look at organizations, and please correct me in the chat if you disagree, I welcome your disagreement. But what I see in organizations is that the programmers and designers, these are usually senior folks, and they don't tend to leave organizations. The installers, they are more junior folks, and they also don't tend to leave organizations. But I see from a fluidity perspective, the senior technician role, that mid kind of 3 to 5 year tech role, that is the most mobile. That's the one that seems to be getting recruited and moving from position to position in other companies. Because of that, like I said, that work that typically that 3 to 5 year person would do falls on these senior people. So how do we deal with that? There's only look, we've got an amazing program. It develops folks in 3 months, but there's only so much we can teach someone in 3 months. I'm not going to teach you to program from scratch in 3 months. I am challenging my team to figure out how we can teach someone to program in less than 5 years, but 3 months, that seems to be pretty aggressive. So what can we do? And this is where this whole Bloom's taxonomy thing comes in. I hope that you will go and research this more after this episode. I think it'll be something that is really powerful for you as a mentor. Now, how we go and we resolve this low to medium to high skilled labor issue is, in my opinion, through mentorship. I do not believe that you can replace having hands on learning. I do think that you will have to have some form of guidance in the form of a mentor. The problem I find with most mentor models is that they're not quantitative, meaning they don't measure the success. How is the mentee progressing? If you tell me you have a mentor model and you say we have mentors, we have senior people who are paired up with our junior people, do you actually have job tasks that these mentors are measuring? Do you have these aligned with the roles? And then are you going and looking at the underlying skills required in order for someone to do whatever the mentor is teaching them? And, obviously, is the mentor qualified to teach? I think that's why we've been so successful, is kind of the hybrid approach we'll take, which I'll tell you later in this episode about. But if we look at this PDF right here, read from left to right: knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, evaluation. And then there's actually a creating part of this as well. That's kind of the very top of the Bloom's taxonomy. But you'll notice if I go here to this PDF and I zoom in here, let's go over and we look. I know the resolution's a little bit bad, but recall, regurgitate facts without understanding. This is where a lot of your brand new hires start off, right? And if you can simply get them to application, this is the kind of defining point. If I'm going to put someone on an install project, construction, I want to get them to application. If I want to get them to a service person, I want to get them to analysis. If I want to get them into designing or programming, that's where we look at the synthesis and evaluation. So what do I mean by all of this? Well, if a new person comes into your organization and they understand Ohm's law, they understand wire gauges, right? They understand all of this and can recall it. They have knowledge. They can go and recall, 22.3 means that it's 22 gauge, 3 conductor, shielded twisted pair or unshielded twisted pair, right? They can discuss that. They can't tell you exactly when you would use it, but they understand how it works at a high level. They move on to comprehension. Now they can understand if they read something and they see it, then they can go and be like, okay, I'm looking at these drawings. I see this is 22.3. I see it's connected to these controllers. I understand why it's connected to these controllers. I get it. And then if you move to application, they can actually apply it. So they can go and actually work hands on and implement this and know why they're doing it. So as a mentor, your most important thing, your most important goal here, and if you're making comments, folks, I can't see them because I'm looking at this on my screen, but is to go from knowledge, comprehension to application in the shortest amount of time possible. So you'll often hear me say we need 3 pillars of knowledge in order to be a BAS professional. We need HVAC, electrical, and IT knowledge. We need those 3 pillars. So your first goal as a mentor, and I know this goes completely against most mentoring models, and it's why the approach is so broken right now. Your first thing you need to do is to get them up to speed on HVAC, IT, and electrical so that they can then understand building automation. And once they understand building automation, they have knowledge of all 4 areas, then move them very quickly into comprehension and application. Now, here's the rub. I'm not an idiot. I know that without revenue, businesses die. So, how do you do knowledge and then comprehension when what you need day one is application? You need application on day one. You've got to get people to the point where they can go and actually apply their labor to a job. That's called applied labor. That's how you bill out. That's how you generate revenue. That's how you make money in your business. So, how do we go about doing this? Well, first off, I'm going to scroll down here and I'm going to look at these actions and outcomes. As you begin working with your mentee as a mentor, you should be focusing on actions and outcomes. So you can have your tech or your salesperson out on the job site. And as they're out on the job site, you want them to be listing out and identifying. So identify what makes this a fan powered box versus a cooling only box. Go and recognize that this is a end of line on a BACnet MSTP trunk, etc. They need to be able to identify. They may not know exactly how this thing does, what it does, but they at least can recognize it, identify it, find it, describe it. So as you work with your mentee, you should have a documented checklist based on their job role that you are having them describe, identify, name, locate, etc. How do you check this? There's a lot of different ways you can do it. You can test them, you can have them fill out worksheets. If you ever done any of our courses, a lot of these are going to look familiar because these are a lot of the outcomes that we drive towards. But you come up with a set of questions, right? Can you tell me? Can you explain? How would you describe, etc.? So when you have this done and you've gotten them through the HVAC, electrical, IT, and the BAS, and this should be your goal for the first month as they're out on the job site with you working, is getting them to understand this. You can quantify this. They either know how to identify a VAV box or they don't. They can either describe how Ohm's law works and the relationships between current, voltage, and resistance, or they can't. Then we can move on to the comprehension. So once you get them to comprehension, I apologize, this is flying around all over the place. This is where we're going to start working with things like interpreting, explaining, comparing, inferring, summarizing. So look at this network diagram and interpret it and tell me, what do you think it's saying? Where should the controllers go? How many controllers do we have? How should they be addressed, etc.? explain how this controller diagram is going to be implemented out in the field using the core concepts. Like they understand what wire is from the previous area, they understand what a controller diagram is. Now you want to start and figure out how do they go and actually comprehend this. And you could test this by a variety of similar things, but the most common way you will test this is going to be simply show and tell, summarization, and quizzing. Those are the easiest three to do on making sure that someone comprehends the controls diagrams that they're looking at. And finally, we move into application. So month 1, knowledge; month 2, comprehension; month 3, you should be moving towards application. Now, I want to be clear, this is iterative. So while you can get someone to application level with terminating wires and doing point-to-point checkout, that does not mean that they are at application level for everything else. So you can have people in multiple different levels of progression, and you should. You should run this, in my opinion, in 13-week cycles. So every 13 weeks, you're going to move someone, at least for the first 2 years, from knowledge, comprehension, application. And then you're going to do that again and again and again and again. And you're going to move them through. And right at about the 2-year mark, you're going to be at a point where they can start to move into analysis and synthesis. And you'll be able to move them in here for some of the higher level tasks like interpreting a program, interpreting a commissioning document, etc. But when you move to application in that 3rd month, this is where they actually do the work independently. I want to be clear on that because this is where a lot of people get lost, is they go and they think to themselves, well, I need my people doing stuff week 1. Absolutely get it. Completely agree. They should be going and doing stuff week 1, but they're not going to be doing it themselves. They're not going to be doing it independently. By month 3, they should, sorry, this mouse is insane. They should be applying and doing things independently, carrying out, executing, implementing, using, executing installation, implementing a design from a set of drawings, using their meter to do functional test, whatever. And how do you do this? Well, typically you're going to do demonstration, performance, and presentation. Those are going to be the most common outcomes that you as a field mentor are going to manage. How would you use your meter? Can you show me how you would wire this up? Can you show me how you would set up a comm bus, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? All right. So I've talked for a lot here and given you kind of what I see as a quantitative approach to mentoring. Hopefully, this is sparks some ideas in you. Here's what I want you to take from this. You still need to go and mentor your people. It's one of the best ways, in my experience, to develop people. You need to challenge the industry belief that it takes 3 to 5 years to create a tech. We know from experience with several tens of thousands of students now that that is not the case. You do need to use SMART goals: specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and timely, and competency-based assessments to determine if people are actually catching on. So, wasn't really going to do this, but no, actually, I should talk with my team before I go share something like that. I was going to share an onboarding plan and talk through how we go about onboarding. I'll anonymize my onboarding plan and then I will share it with you. But essentially, what we do with our onboarding plans is we break them into 3-month cycles, like I mentioned, and we have month 1, 2, and 3, and we have a SMART goal, 2 to 3 SMART goals in each month. We have what are they going to do? How is it going to be measured? And then how are they performing that? And what resources do they have available to them? Then at the 30, 60, 90-day period, we will actually meet with that employee and we will have them self-assess and we will assess them as well. I know this seems like a lot of work, but it really only takes about 30 minutes 3 times. So you've got your 30-day, your 60-day, and your 90-day, and those are usually 30 to 60-minute meetings. But what we've seen from that is we are really able to rapidly move an employee to competency from wherever they're at. And I encourage you to look at that as well by using these SMART goals and then by using the competency based assessments and by using that Bloom's taxonomy approach, you're able to really upskill pretty quickly. So, with that being said, I know I've given you a lot here to unpack. I am more than happy to answer any questions you have and kind of explain things further for you. Hopefully, this gave you a different way to look at mentoring your employees, at developing your employees. Hopefully, you're going to go back to your management team, or if you are the management team, hopefully, you're going to look and say, do we actually have our job descriptions accurately representing what people need to do? Do we have an onboarding plan that's, specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and timely? Are we testing competency? Are our mentors empowered to move people from, that understanding to comprehending to actually executing level through their development in a rapid amount of time? Yeah. So with that being said, I'll check for questions, see what, if anyone has question wise, and then we'll call it a wrap because I actually have a couple onboarding or sorry, 30-day things I've got to go do for my own internal team. But yeah, I hope this gives you a different perspective on how to go about, excuse me, so dry in here, uh, actually approaching your employees' development. And yeah, not seeing any questions. So, with that being said, thank you everyone for being here. I will continue to bring some good stuff. I think, what is next week going to be? I don't know if next week's going to be a high level review of soft skills. I think that might be the following week if I remember correctly. And then we're going to be having a finance. We're going to bring our finance person on. We're going to be bringing our salesperson on to talk about sales management. We'll be going through CRMs, ERPs, talking about business systems, integrations, IT architecture for a business, etc. All right, folks. Well, you all have a good one. Don't forget Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific, we are going to be starting our technician series. It's not specific to technicians, but if you have someone who's brand new and you just like to get them a baseline understanding of things, this will be, introduction to building automation, basic input and output types, basic wiring fundamentals, things like that. Thanks so much for being here. I hope you all have an awesome day. Definitely go check out podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/457 for all of the resources, things like our free skill assessment, talking about quantitatively assessing your employees. I welcome all of you to use that. It is completely free and enables you to assess your people where they're at. And if you have any questions, do not hesitate to reach out. Thanks a ton, and I hope you all have an awesome rest of your day. Take care.